Hello, my name is John Maloney. I was born in Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland, in 1946. I've travelled a lot and now live happily in Portugal, but I'll come back to that later. Growing up in the heart of Edinburgh's Old Town, my mother tongue was a dialect known as Broad Scots. Looking back, I realised that this was, and perhaps still is, a central part of my cultural identity. It obviously is a vehicle which contains many very rich childhood memories. And I still feel it has a vigour which is very powerfully expressive. Over the past few days, thanks to Facebook, I've reconnected with some of my former neighbours from 70 years ago. Yes, 70 years ago. There's not many of us left. The names, the characters: Davy the Butcher, Mr. Glenn the Bagpipe Maker, Mr. Capaldi the Barber, the sights, the smells, have all been flooding back. That's part of who I am, and it's in Broad Scots. I understand the horizons for someone who speaks only Broad Scots, or their local equivalent, are narrow. As an adult, I worked for a short time in a very deprived town in Scotland where English was regarded as a foreign language. The already low employment prospects for young people in the town are further limited by their inability or reluctance to communicate in standard English. Worrying, there's also a risk that inward-looking politicians might exploit the situation to their own narrow nationalist agenda. I became a teacher. My first professional job was in Sweden. I quickly discovered that my fluency in Broad Scots was actually very useful. Thanks to visiting Vikings between the 8th and 11th centuries, many Swedish words and phrases are nearly identical to Broad Scots. So I was able to pick up the language very quickly, but I'll come back to that later. My second mother tongue is English. I built a very satisfying career as a teacher of English language and literature and loved the language. English is perceived as being of a higher status than local dialects, such as Broad Scots. And I understand that. English is widely spoken and understood and provides access to a very rich cultural heritage. However, I don't accept that it has to be one or the other. Both are appropriate and perfectly valid in a proper context. Let's look at the term mother tongue literally. It probably means grandmother's tongue. But why not father's tongue? Or indeed grandfather's tongue? In an increasingly interconnected world, cross-cultural relationships are now very common, perhaps routine. I'm thinking of 7-year-old Tiago. His mother is Brazilian and his father French. They took a conscious decision. Mother speaks to him in Brazilian Portuguese, father speaks to him in French. Little Tiago converses fluently and happily in both languages simultaneously. My fragile ego was saved by the fact that Tiago's English is not very good. I think of seamen from Wales transporting coal to Brittany and France. Both regions, physically separated by vast areas of very rough seas, are culturally Celtic. The men communicated very freely using their mother dialects rather than standard English or French. The common root of their language is Gaelic. The two dialects are different, but with goodwill, mutually comprehensible. I'm working with a woman who was born and grew up in Latvia. Her parents are Russian. Her mother tongue is Russian. And although she's not spent much time in the country, she does not think of herself as Latvian. She currently works in Zurich, in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. Many Swiss people speak at least two of the country's official languages, and many speak all three: French, German, Italian. I wonder, how do they decide which is their mother tongue? I should ask my friend Werner, who's a German-speaking Swiss citizen, but he was brought up in Israel, speaking Hebrew. Let's go back to Grandma's time. I live in a small village in central Portugal where the average age is over 70. My wife and I have the babies in the village. Only 2 of our neighbours have spent any time out of the village. They were driven out by economic and social pressures and worked in France. So thankfully I can converse with them in French. Portuguese is very difficult. Apart from them, no one speaks any language other than the local variant of Portuguese. The communal oven and wash house are no longer used, but the culture remains as it has been for hundreds of years. The young people have all gone to Lisbon, to America, to Britain. Here, in my adopted home, there's no need for standard Portuguese. Dialect is commonly regarded as inferior by speakers of the dominant local language. A good example of this is found in the former Czechoslovakia. What became the Czech Republic was, in economic terms, the dominant, more economically developed region. As a result, Czechs looked down on Slovaks and their language. Now, Czechoslovakia was long and narrow, stretching just over 1,000 kilometers from east to west. The dialect in Western Slovakia is quite different from the dialect in Eastern Slovakia, which borders the Czech Republic. The mother tongue in Eastern Slovakia is much closer to the Czech language. My friends in Eastern Slovakia tell me they find Czech easier to understand than the Slovak spoken in Western Slovakia. And sadly, they tend to look down on the Westerners. There have been attempts internationally to formalize and consolidate the dominance of the main language. In Britain, received pronunciation, better known as the Queen's English or BBC English, was developed as a mark of social distinction, and for too long, far too long, dominated public life in Britain. Those days are gone, and good riddance to them. The essential function of language is communication. I would suggest that we're all of us at least bilingual. We use different language models when we're talking to children, to the president, or the postman, and that's okay. In Broad Scots, my mother tongue, we have an expression, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. That translates as, we are all descended from a common ancestor, the mythical John Thomson. An interesting aside, bairn, meaning child, is very close to the Swedish word barn, meaning child. As I said, I found Swedish very easy to pick up. The Broad Scots expression has more vigour and honesty than standard English. But perhaps I'm prejudiced, perhaps I'm biased. So following that logic, we're all cousins. So, cousins, I invite you, find a dialect expression from your own mother tongue which expresses the same sentiment and enjoy it.